Well, hello, everyone. Hello again. This is Hans Gutherson here for the second episode of Wedgie Talk. Thanks again for joining us. And today I have a very special guest with me, a very good friend of mine, here to chat about his writing and the community. My very good friend from DeviantArt, ehp32. Thanks very much for joining us today. Can I call you Pascal or Cal? Which would you prefer for this? Or
Either
EHP?
is fine.
Cool.
Cal's fine.
Cool. Yeah, it's all good. But thank you very much for joining me. It's really cool to chat with you. We've obviously been friends for a while, and it's interesting, I think, to get some of your insights into writing and some of your thoughts on the community. So I'm excited to jump right into it.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, for sure. So I'd like to start, for people who may not be super familiar with you, if you could just tell us a bit more about yourself and the community, what you do, and what you're all about, I'd say.
Starting off with a hard question, huh? I don't know. I'm just I don't really know what to say. I'm just kind of floating around in the community, and sometimes I add some new writing up. Kind of depends on how I'm feeling. So yeah, mostly I just post some stories and participate in contests, and you and I have an RP going on, and
Yeah.
it's been going on for a while now, actually. So yeah, that's what I do.
So sort of going a bit deeper into that, what sort of stories do you write for people who maybe haven't read some of your work? How would you describe your writing style and some of the stuff you've written?
I write a lot of different stuff. Usually it's just short stories. I also write some poetry and stuff. Of course, most of it revolves around wedges, of course. But then a lot of my stories and poems feature the LGBT community and just trans people in general. So yeah.
And that's something I definitely wanted to touch on, the idea that you are this sort of unique voice in the community in terms of writing about and identifying as part of the LGBT community and sort of transgender stories. And I was wondering if you could sort of talk more about what that's like, that experience for you, and being one of the sole writers in the community to write stories about that.
Yeah, it's kind of different. I mean, the majority of the community is male men. They kind of dominate, no pun intended, but they kind of dominate the community. And so, a lot of people don't exactly talk about, how they identify or whatever. So, it doesn't come up a lot. But I do think that I'm one of the very few in the community, like you said, that is out and open about all of this stuff. So it's pretty interesting seeing. I mean, no one's reaction is bad or anything. Usually, it's just surprise, I think. Sometimes.
Yeah, no, I get that. As you said, if it's rare to sort of see people identifying, I understand. Sort of surprise me being a reaction. But going a bit deeper into that, when it comes to telling stories about transgender characters, as you've done, do you think people who aren't transgender, or I guess even to take a step back before we get into that too much, why do you think it's important that, as you said, like because so many people in the community do identify as male, and many of them identify as being straight, according to the demographic survey I did before, why do you think it's important that you and maybe others as well are telling stories about transgender characters and exploring more of the LGBTQ community?
Well, you see it a lot, just like mainstream media. Um, you always want representation of who you are in the media, and you want to, growing up when you're a little kid and you're gay or whatever, and all you want to see when you turn on the TV is a gay character to look up to. So I think that's where a lot of it comes from, is me just wanting to represent, and me wanting people who maybe don't know that much about themselves or whatever, to see themselves in it. Just open up some diversity in the community, and just have everyone, well, not everyone, but a majority of people be represented.
Yeah, no, it's very well said, very well said. And I think it certainly goes without saying in my eyes that we need more diversity in the storytelling that we're doing, and LGBTQ characters should be a part of, I think, the stories we're telling. And as you said, there are people in the community who do identify with those characters, and who I think need to have characters who resonate with them, even if they're maybe not out in the community and as prominent as some of the larger demographics maybe.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
sort of,
definitely.
yeah, and sort of going from that, do you think it's possible for writers who don't identify as transgender, or members of the members, probably not the right word, but who don't identify as being part of the LGBTQ community, do you think they can tell these stories? Or should it just be people who identify in the group who can tell these stories?
I think it depends. There's no set, you can do this, and I think that, if people want to write about that stuff, then knock yourself out. You just got to make sure that what you're writing is based on some truth, and maybe not truth. Truth maybe isn't the right word, but based on just something that, something like, you can't go in and write a story about, President Abraham Lincoln of the United States without knowing anything about him. You got to have some background information. You can't just go in willy-nilly and think you know everything and think you can write this great story if you don't have any background information. So I think that's what you at least need to start a story like that.
So for people who are maybe thinking about telling some of these stories, but maybe don't have some of the background, what do you think from your perspective they maybe should know before getting into writing about it, or things they should maybe try to learn more about before they start telling these stories?
I mean, basically, I just said, make sure you have all your facts right, make sure you know some basic terminology. And if you can, talk to someone. Anyone's always welcome to talk to me about stuff. I know a couple other writers in the community that are LGBT, and just get some depth from someone, I guess, or go on to Google and read someone's Instagram story or whatever, and just make sure that you really understand what you're going to write about. I think is what you need to do.
Yeah, no, I think that makes a lot of sense. Growing that understanding in some ways, that makes sense for sure. So we've chatted a bit about this before on a different note, but I'm curious to learn, or if you'd like to speak about how you sort of got into the community, because I know it's different from my own experience and experience of a lot of people who sort of joined in the sort of way I did. So would you be able to sort of chat about how you joined the community and where you sort of started?
Yeah, no, definitely. I think I started like a lot of other people, and it developed at a young age. The fetish did, and so you see these things in TV, and then you grow up watching cartoons like The Grim Adventures of Billy and Mandy, or The Fairly Odd Parents, or something like that.
Classic.
And yeah, exactly. And you just see them, and I think that's how a lot of people fetish for this started. And so I think that's definitely where it started. But as I've told you before, I didn't really, as I developed the fetish, I never really watched a lot of videos. I just remember, the first time I created my DA account was, about 5 years ago almost, and
Wow.
I just remember creating it so I could read stories, and it wasn't until probably 3 years ago that I started posting and writing. And so a lot of where I started was just reading the other stories that people wrote. Like, I remember reading Anti-Cherry's stories, and Richmond Academy for Girls. That series has been discontinued, but I remember that's where I started out reading, and that's kind of where my fetish developed into. So.
And it's fascinating because I know when we spoke before, I said I sort of started on Luckyfish forums, which obviously we had Anti-Cherry and we had his stories, which were a huge influence for me as well. And I know when I mentioned some of the big videos and the creators on Luckyfish forums, they weren't super familiar to you, which I thought was kind of mind-blowing that despite having this fetish, it sort of depends what site you which I think is very interesting in terms of differing experiences.
Yeah. And everyone starts out a different way, and I think we all end the same way. We all gravitated towards this community on DA and Lucky Fetish, and we're all just gonna stay that way, I guess.
Yeah. No, I think you're right. I think many of us do. Many of us do stay that way, and we stay active in the communities. And sort of going from that, you mentioned reading stories like Anti-Cherry, his work, and Richmond Academy for Girls. How did you sort of go from reading the stories to writing them? What was the inspiration behind you sort of picking up the pen, or I guess sitting down to the keyboard and starting to write? And when did you start writing originally?
I'm not sure. I don't think I started writing these types of stories until probably 3 or 4 years ago.
Okay.
But I've always been a writer. I've always enjoyed writing and reading. I've been reading since I was a young kid. And so that kind of, it just developed, seeing all of these stories and realizing that, hey, this could be me. I could create something, maybe not as amazing as that, because I don't think it's that amazing, but just the concept of being able to create something that people can get lost in and that people can love so much really just fascinated me, I guess.
Yeah, I think that's beautiful. And I think in a lot of ways you have been doing that, right? You've been growing a following. You've been gaining some of that attention. And I think definitely a fan base of people who are, I think, finding escape, and I think finding more than that in your work, which is pretty amazing as well.
Yeah.
And I guess just sort of going from that, do you have a story of yours that you think is your favorite or your best at this point?
That's kind of hard. I have a lot of favorites, but to say the best one that I've written, my guess would be Jesus, it's hard. Probably the story that I wrote for Anime Panties, an ode to AP is what I called it. it didn't get a lot of attention, I don't think. But you know, I had so much fun writing it, and I love his story so much. And so being able to use his characters and kind of put my own twist on it and have him like it was just so much fun. And I think that was probably my favorite to write and my favorite as of now. I have a lot of ideas in the book that I think might, once I write it and once I put it out, it might be my favorite. But that time has to come first. So I definitely think that that's my favorite one as of now. My best written one, I think.
Yeah, no, that's very cool. And I appreciate the insights into sort of why that's your favorite. The fact it was fun to write and you think you were able to have some fun with it, and as well, and playing with characters you like as well, which is really interesting. And I guess just sort of going from that, you mentioned having ideas that you have and that you're thinking about in the short term. What are your plans? Do you have stories we can maybe expect, or any details of things you're working on that you could share?
I'm in the midst right now of a role play with gosh, what's his name? I'm in the midst of a role play with writer is Wedgie, I think. I think that's his name. We're doing an RP right now, and you know, we haven't gotten that far into it, but I think it has a lot of potential. And once we get a little deeper into it, then I'll definitely post parts of it. But as for ideas that I have so many in my head and ones that I've written down. But I think the biggest one that I'm going to focus on is featuring a non-binary character and a transgender character again. Because like I said, you know, I like to try and represent people and represent different people in the community. And so I think that will be my next story to get on. I just got to write it first.
Always the toughest part, I guess, actually getting to write it all.
Yeah.
And I guess sort of from there as well, in the long term, looking to the future, and sort of, as you mentioned, tons of ideas coming down, some stories you're thinking of working on. But in the long term, what would you love to see for yourself in terms of, are there big projects you'd want to tackle, or characters you'd want to write about in the long term, or just what kind of goals maybe do you have set for the future?
That's a good question. I think the goal would to be to, you know, I've started so many different characters and so many different OCs that I think to have an ongoing series like you did with YWNR and like Anime Panties has with Friend Sessions. I think to have a running storyline going and putting content out on a set schedule, or even not a set schedule, just in general. I think that's one of my goals. But also, you know, to try and expand myself and expand my watching count, and you know, I'm hoping soon to get some art up on my page. Because I think that's a necessity. But yeah, I think having an ongoing series and then completing the ones that I've already started is where I want to start at.
Nice. That's super exciting. A lot of exciting stuff coming for you, it sounds like, and for the community when you start sharing it. But you also said something interesting. You said art was a necessity for your page. What do you mean by that?
Well, you know, I mean, maybe this is just me talking and it's just a personal preference, but I think that, you know, being able to get so indulged in a series that you're reading. And then, you know, stopping at a chapter and the next thing you see is a piece of art featuring those characters that you've been reading about.
Mm-hmm.
I think it is necessary to just have a visual, because, you know, what if you've been totally picturing that character not wrong, but, you know, in a different way, just to see the author's intake and what they actually picture with the characters, I think is very interesting, and I think that a lot of people need to do that, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, no, it certainly does. It certainly does. I think, as you said, being able to picture them and then being able to see that visual, I think it's a very interesting way to add to a story, I think, and how people take it in, which is very cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I guess just as someone who's been in the community for many years, as you've mentioned, joining back 5 years ago on DA and then starting to write as well, what do you think a Wedgie story needs, or what do you think it really should have if it's going to be good?
That's a good question. I think what it needs is, you know, deep content. Not like psychologically deep. I mean, obviously you don't want to go so deep that people, you know, aren't very. I mean, they're still going to read your story, but, you know, they're there to read a Wedgie story, not, you know, some existential crisis story that has one Wedgie in it or whatever.
So eliminate some of my work, I guess.
Mine too, man. But I think what it just needs is, you know, you need your own twist on it. I mean, obviously everyone else has their own writing style that's different. So I think that's also important, is originality and just your effort being put into this is what you need. And of course, I think that well-developed characters is also another thing. I mean, obviously, if you're writing a story in, you know, 100 words or less, like some people host contests that do that, and I've submitted some to that, and obviously that's, you know, an exception, but, you know, you need background to your characters. There needs to be depth in that aspect. You can't just throw in, you know, Tina and Sarah and put them in a room together and expect people to love the story when, you know, there's no depth in the content or in descriptions or anything.
Yeah, no, I think that makes a lot of sense. In some ways, yeah, I've seen stories where they might be very vague in the descriptions, but in the same sense, they have depth in maybe what characters are thinking or what they're feeling. And I think it can be interesting, as you said, different styles, but having some sort of depth in some aspect of it, whether that's maybe very, very detailed descriptions of what they look like or what they're wearing, or in their actions and why they're doing what they're doing, I think can be a lot to elevate a story, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I've read so many stories, and even stories that I would read when I first developed a fetish. You know, they weren't good stories. There was no descriptions of the characters. It was all vague. But, you know, you're young and you have to fill that need almost like a hunger.
Yes.
And so you'll read whatever you get. But, you know, now I've matured as a writer and as a human being, I've come to find myself very particular and picky about what I like to read, which is kind of ironic because I put out so much shitty stuff. I think.
Don't say that. Don't say that. Don't say that. No, as I said, you're growing a following, right? Which is cool to see, and I think as you probably know, right, I think one of the steps to being able to do what you do, and I guess you'll have a maybe different experience and some different thoughts on this, but I think what it sort of comes down to is just doing it and just having some confidence that you can do this, right? Like for you, what is it that maybe motivates you to keep writing? Like I'm guessing you don't really think all your stuff sucks, right? Or you wouldn't have posted it.
Yeah, sometimes I'll post something. I mean, I've deleted so much off of my profile because I go back and I look at it and I'm like, what was I thinking about when I wrote this? And, I've deleted a lot of content off of my page. Probably maybe 10 or 15 deviations, I think.
Wow.
So yeah, I think confidence is a big part of it. And as you grow as a writer, you get more confident. And taking a chance, even if you aren't that confident, like I can be sometimes. If you just once you click submit or whatever, and you see it on your page, you kind of get like this wave of relief washing over you. Until that first comment or that first view, even you're anxious about what people are gonna say.
Yeah.
And like you said, like you're very sensitive to criticism. I'm that same way. I'm so scared of what everyone's gonna think. Which also makes the stories that I've written using other people's characters. That's also my fear is, I write these stories and I put so much of my time and my effort into them, and I'm just so afraid that the people that I wrote them for, the people's characters that I use, that person just doesn't like it. Which, might be kind of weird to say, but it's just an underlying anxiety that I always have, I feel like, and I've always have had, and I probably always will have, regarding writing and life even.
Yeah, and I can tell you, and from I think every writer who I've ever talked to, and I know in my own experience, the anxiety stays, and I've always said that I think that's good. I think it's good that we have some of that, because if we weren't worried about what people would think, maybe we just put out garbage, right? And we wouldn't stop to think like maybe I can do better if we just thought, oh, I'll put it out and people will love it and that'll be that. I have always had that. I have it with everything I post, and I know when I was first writing, when I first posted Lucy and Daniela, I was so scared what people were going to think when I was a new writer, that when I first submitted that, I put the name anonymous on it because I want people to know it was me so they couldn't judge me and reject me and all that stuff. And I eventually was like, hey, I want the credit for this. I need all the attention. And then I put my name on it and I posted it myself, but on LF. But yeah, no, it's certainly not easy, but I think that anxiety, the same thing that can maybe make it difficult, also makes us better writers, I think, in some ways.
Exactly. I mean, I think that, as weird as this might sound, I think anxiety is a necessity for life. Because, if you don't worry about something, it kind of shows that you don't really care that much. If you have anxiety about a big test coming up, then, that means that you actually care about this test. You care about what will happen. But, if you're not worried, if you're not studying or whatever, it shows that, you could really care less about this test. It doesn't really matter that much to you. So I think having anxiety in a way about something that you're passionate about is necessary for you to succeed at it.
Yeah, well said. Well said. Yeah. So that no, I think it is. I think sums it up very, very nicely, my friend. I guess just sort of taking it from there, one of my last questions. What do you think about the community as someone who is on DA? Are you in the other sites as well? Are you on LF now? And I guess the new Wedgie Buddies site that's also out. Like, are you on those other sites? And just overall, what do you think about the community? What you've seen and how it's changed, and maybe what you like to see change in the future with it?
Well, I think I do have an LF account. I'm not on it that much. DA is usually the main platform that I use. And just I've been on DA for, what did I say, 5 years or so. And so, like I said earlier, as I mature, my writing has matured, and I've also realized how much this community has. And I mean, this community, it's so great. It's so accepting, and I don't really hear any bad things from anyone. Everything, all the stories that I read, when I look at the comments, everything's always really positive. Like, I mean, there's some criticism, but it's not like, hey, you suck. It's, hey, this is a really great story. It has potential, but you could change this. You could add this. And that's really important. You don't have to be mean about criticism, but you need to, if you want to criticize someone, you need to be nice about it. You need to, have a heart. You can't just be an asshole. And I mean, you can be, but that won't get you really far in life, I've found.
Well said. Well said. Yeah, obviously the community isn't perfect, and we've seen a lot of harassment of women, for example, of our female members in the community and things like that. But yeah, in terms of writing, I've definitely seen a lot of support and stuff. As someone who identifies as trans and who's been open about it in the community, have you encountered any sort of difficulties on that front, being in the community and in your writing or anything like that?
I have not. Nothing bad. A lot of people I've found that watch me or like my stuff. I found that a majority of them don't really understand a lot of the time. It's always confusion that I'm met with, even in the community and in life in general. It's confusion as to why I am how I am. And so it's interesting how different everyone is. But yeah, no, I've always been met with very nice, nice responses, I guess, is the best way to say it.
Yeah, no, I think that's wonderful.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that's wonderful to hear. I'm very glad. Yeah. And I guess sort of like you said, it must be difficult, I imagine, the sort of confusion when it comes to, I guess, being trans, and then I guess as well you have the added confusion of, I also like wedgies, which in itself is a pretty confusing thing for most people. And I guess coming to terms with all that must not have been easy, right? And something that a lot of us who don't identify as trans, I think a lot probably where that confusion comes from, I think.
I always find myself when I write a story, I always find myself confused if I'm writing a male on male wedgie story, or whenever I'm writing as a male on the receiving end. I never really know how to write it and how to describe, because I've never felt that. If that makes sense. I'm trying not to be graphic. But I can go through what I've been through, but it's hard to write about the receiving end of a wedgie with a dick when I don't have one. Is the easiest way to say it.
Yeah, no, I think laying it out there makes sense. Yeah, no, I think it makes sense, right? And I think for any of us trying to write about, if we're dudes, writing about female receivers or anything like that as well, yeah, there's that difficulty of how do we tell this story in a way that we hope is accurate, right, as well. But
yeah, and I found that a lot of male writers, like yourself, you do a great job of describing what it's like, and I think you really hit the nail on the head, honestly. But I think it also might be a little easier to describe as a female getting on the receiving end of Wedgie rather than a male. That's just my personal opinion, but I think part of it is easier a little bit.
Yeah, I think that's fascinating. And yeah, so I think that answers my questions. It's been really interesting to sort of hear some of your thoughts and your insights in the community. We were talking about the community and some of the ups and downs. You mentioned sort of all the great feedback there and things like that. What would you maybe like to see changed in the community or see improved going forward overall?
As you said before, I think that there's being in a male-dominated community, I think that kind of is the problem when we're met with female writers or female artists. And I think that has to change. I mean, we live in or at least I live in a society where, a lot of men think that they're better and more superior than women. And I think that in general needs to change, like in the world, not just in the community. But I think that, we've got to learn to be more respectful towards people, and, just work on having a heart and having empathy towards other writers, because you never know what they're going through, whether it is what they're writing about or how they're feeling towards something. If that makes any sense. I don't think it does.
No, it makes a lot of sense, I think. Yeah. No, I think empathy is key to being a good writer and a good person, I think, as you were saying. So I think that's something really wonderful for us to work toward, I think, a really admirable goal you set for the community and the human race as a whole. So thank you for the very nice aspirational goals. But this has been great, my friend. I really appreciate you taking the time to chat with me. Is there anything we didn't touch on that you think your fans and the community that you'd like to share and sort of mention that you thought we might talk about, but we didn't?
Not that I can think of. I think we touched on everything. Your questions were great. So you should get a lot of credit for this. It can't be easy interviewing someone, especially about this and stuff. So yes, you get a lot of credit for this. You did a great job, man.
Yeah, thank you, my friend. And I had some other question. All this praise has made me forget about my last question. Oh yeah, do you have any questions for the community just to sort of end us off? Anything you'd like to just sort of put out there and ask them?
I feel like I have so many questions that I would love to ask people, but right now my mind is going blank.
Is there maybe one question?
Yeah.
Maybe one question that you think you'd just like to put out there for people to think about in the community, or just one thing maybe for them to take away from all this that you'd maybe like them to think about more, maybe going forward?
I guess one thing to take away is, whether you're reading my stories or you're writing your own or you're reading someone else's, just think about the characters. And, if you're reading mine, think about my characters. Think about, how my stories kind of come from a personal point of view. So I think that's very important to keep in mind. Is, a lot of people, when they write, they're exposing themselves. And so it's really important to remember that. Is when you're reading someone's story or whatever, you're reading into them, you're reading a part of them, basically. So I think that's a very important thing to remember, and just in general in life too. Like, I'm saying a lot of life lessons in this interview, I guess.
That's all right. It's a lot to take away, and I think that's beautifully said, my friend. Yeah, and I think that's a wonderful place to sort of end us off. The idea that the stories can be far more than wedgies, I think, which has been a theme, I think, throughout what we've talked about, whether it's talking about transgender stories or going in more depth with characters and just being a better person in the community overall. It's just about going for more, I think, and I love that you're someone who's been doing that, and I hope you continue to. And it sounds like you've got some big plans for us to look forward to.
Yeah, I hope so. As soon as I get some motivation and get writing, then you'll definitely you should expect more.
Yeah, well, I'm looking forward to it. I'm certainly looking forward to it, and I'm looking forward to what comes next for you. But thanks again, my friend, for chatting with me about this. I really appreciate you taking the time, and thanks again. And I look forward to seeing what you put out next.
Yeah, no, thank you so much, man. It's been an honor talking with you and being able to discuss this shit with you. Great.
Well, thanks again. Thanks for listening, everybody. Keep being awesome, and we'll